The moment you stop chasing someone is often the exact moment you discover who they really are. My phone lit up at 11:47 p.m. as I sat alone in the parking lot of a grocery store just outside Plano, Texas. The engine of my Ford F-150 was off, but the summer heat still lingered inside the cab. I stared at the screen, watching Madison's name flash across a message notification after 6 unanswered calls. 6. Not because I was jealous. Not because I wanted to control her. I simply wanted to know if my wife was coming home. We'd been married for 12 years. At least I thought that still meant something. I opened the message. Don't call me. I'm not your property. For a second, the world seemed to narrow down to those 7 words glowing against the dark screen. The parking lot lights reflected off the windshield. A shopping cart rolled across the asphalt somewhere in the distance. Everything felt strangely quiet. I read the message again, then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Perfectly. Funny how a single sentence can carry the weight of 100 arguments you never wanted to have. Looking back, that message didn't surprise me as much as it should have. The truth is, nothing important ever breaks all at once. It cracks slowly, quietly, month after month. You just convince yourself you're imagining the sound. Madison wasn't always like this. There was a time when she used to call me on her lunch breaks just to tell me about her day. A time when she'd save me the last slice of pizza because she knew it was my favorite. A time when she looked at me like we were on the same team. Somewhere along the way, that changed. Promotions came. New coworkers arrived. New friends. New priorities. Every year, she seemed to move a little farther away while standing in the exact same room. But that night, sitting in that parking lot, I wasn't thinking about the last 12 years. I was thinking about the fact that my wife hadn't come home. Earlier that evening, she'd told me she was meeting coworkers downtown for drinks after work. Nothing unusual. She'd done it dozens of times before. Don't wait up, she'd said while grabbing her purse. I remembered smiling and telling her to have fun. That was nearly 7 hours ago. Midnight was approaching. Her location was off. Her phone kept going to voicemail. And every call I'd made had been fueled by concern, not suspicion. At least that's what I told myself. Maybe part of me already knew something was wrong. Maybe part of me had known for months. My thumb hovered over the screen. Most men would have argued. Some would have sent a paragraph. Others would have called again just to prove a point. I didn't do any of that. Instead, I stared through the windshield at the empty rows of parked cars. The dashboard clock ticked over to 11:48. I felt tired. Not angry. Not heartbroken. Just tired. Tired of defending myself against accusations I never earned. Tired of being told that caring was controlling. Tired of pretending every disrespectful comment was just stress from work. My fingers moved across the screen. 7 words. That's all I sent. Perfect. Then don't come home. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. The silence afterward felt different. Heavier. Final. I didn't know where Madison was. I didn't know who she was with. I didn't know what would happen when she read my reply. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't interested in chasing the answer. I started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot. The radio remained off. The Texas highway stretched ahead beneath pools of amber streetlight. And as I drove home, I thought the night was finally over. I was wrong, because less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. It was Brittany Foster, Madison's closest friend. And the first thing she said was, "Ryan, do you know where your wife really is tonight?" For a second, I thought about letting the call go to voicemail. It was almost midnight. My head was already full, and Brittany Foster was the last person I expected to hear from. Madison and Brittany had been friends for years. The kind of friends who finished each other's sentences, shared inside jokes nobody else understood, and disappeared for entire weekends on girls' trips that always seemed to generate hundreds of photos and very few details. If Brittany was calling me at this hour, something was wrong. I tapped accept and held the phone to my ear. "Hello." There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough to make me grip the steering wheel a little tighter. "Ryan," she said quietly, "please tell me you are at home." Her voice sounded different. Less confident. Less polished. I checked the road ahead and eased into the right lane. "I'm driving home." "What?" Another pause. I could hear music somewhere in the background, distant voices, the faint sound of a door closing. Then silence again. "Ryan," she said, "do you know where Madison really is tonight?" The question landed harder than I expected. Not because of what it implied. because of how carefully she asked it. Most people rush into bad news. Brittany sounded like someone approaching a sleeping bear. She told me she was downtown with coworkers. I answered. Why? The line went quiet again. Long enough for me to hear the hum of my tires against the pavement. Long enough for my stomach to tighten. That is what she told you? Brittany finally asked. Yes. And you believed her? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because 12 years of marriage teaches you certain habits. Trust becomes automatic. Or at least it is supposed to. Should I not have? I asked. Brittany exhaled slowly. Ryan, I am not calling to start drama. Then why are you calling? Another silence. Looking back, that silence told me more than her words ever could. People hesitate when they are deciding how much truth someone deserves. Because what happened tonight got out of hand, she said. And I do not think you know the whole story. My pulse quickened. I kept my eyes on the road. What story? Madison is not at a work event. My fingers tightened around the wheel. Then where is she? She is at a rooftop bar in downtown Dallas. I frowned. That does not sound very shocking. It is not the location. Brittany's voice dropped lower. It is what has been happening there. The dashboard clock rolled past midnight. The highway stretched endlessly ahead beneath rows of streetlights. I suddenly felt very awake. Just tell me. She hesitated again. Ryan, for months now, Madison has been talking about your marriage with people you do not know. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just a growing sense that a door was opening somewhere, and I was not going to like what was behind it. People talk, I said. That is not exactly a crime. No, Brittany replied. But making your husband the punchline every week is not exactly normal either. Those words stayed with me. The punchline. I thought about the message Madison had sent earlier. I am not your property. The confidence behind it. The certainty. At the time it felt cruel. Now it felt rehearsed. Like a line she had delivered before. What are you saying? I asked. Brittany let out a breath. I am saying that tonight was not the first time your name came up. It was just the first time I could not sit there and listen anymore. My truck rolled through a green light. The road home was only 10 minutes away, but suddenly it felt much longer. Listen to what? I asked quietly. On the other end of the line, Brittany went silent for several seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice barely rose above a whisper. Ryan, if you knew what Madison has been saying about you these last 6 months, you would understand why I called. And trust me, the text message was not even the worst part. I pulled into my driveway a few minutes later, but I stayed in the truck with the engine running. The garage door was closed. The porch light glowed against the front steps. Everything looked exactly the way it had looked thousands of nights before. That was the strange thing about a marriage falling apart. The outside rarely changed first. Brittany stayed on the phone while I stared at the house. What exactly has she been saying? I finally asked. I heard her shift positions before answering. Ryan, it was never one big thing. That is what makes it worse. It was 100 little things. I leaned my head back against the seat. Such as, Brittany hesitated. She makes jokes about you. I almost laughed. Everyone makes jokes about their spouse sometimes. Not like this. Her voice remained steady. At first it seemed harmless. Complaints about you being predictable. Complaints about routines. Complaints about how you always wanted to spend weekends at home. I listened quietly. None of that sounded unusual. Married people complained. People vented. That was life. But Brittany continued. Then it changed. The dashboard lights cast a pale blue glow across the cab. I watched a moth circle the porch light. How? I asked. She stopped talking about things you did. Brittany paused. She started talking about who you were. Those words landed differently. I could not explain why. Maybe because actions can change. Character is harder to repair. What does that mean? I asked. She called you boring. I nodded slowly. That one did not hurt. I was boring. I paid bills on time. I changed air filters. I mowed the lawn every Saturday morning. Exciting was never part of my brand. Then she started calling you weak. My jaw tightened slightly. Weak? Yes. Brittany sounded uncomfortable now. She said you never pushed back. She said you always avoided conflict. She said she could predict everything you would say before you said it. I looked toward the house again. The kitchen window reflected the porch light. 12 years of memories sat behind that glass. Holiday dinners. Sunday breakfasts. Movie nights. Small, ordinary moments that had once felt permanent. And everybody just listened? I asked. Some people laughed. Brittany's answer came quietly. Some people looked uncomfortable. Most stayed silent. Silence. Funny how often silence shows up when things matter most. I thought about all the dinners Madison and I had shared over the past year. All the conversations that felt shorter. All the evenings she spent scrolling her phone while I sat across from her. Looking back, there had been warning signs everywhere. I just kept finding explanations for them. Work stress, burnout, long hours, temporary phases. People do that when they love someone. They become amateur detectives searching for innocent explanations. This has been going on for 6 months. I asked. Closer to 8. 8 months. Nearly a year. The number settled heavily in my chest. Not because I felt betrayed. Not exactly. It was something stranger. It felt like discovering I had been attending a meeting every day without realizing everyone else was discussing me after I left the room. Brittany cleared her throat. Ryan, I need you to understand something. What? Tonight was different. I sat forward slightly. Different how? The silence returned. Longer this time. Then Brittany said something that made my stomach drop. Because tonight she was not just mocking you. I frowned. What do you mean? Her answer came slowly, carefully, like she was choosing every word. Tonight she was talking about ending the marriage. The neighborhood remained perfectly still outside my windshield. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler clicked across a lawn. Water hissed softly in the darkness. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary night. But suddenly none of it felt ordinary anymore. Ending it. I repeated. Yes. Brittany lowered her voice. And Ryan. She seemed very sure of herself. Like she already knew exactly how the story was going to end. What she did not know was that someone at that table had finally decided to tell you the truth. After I hung up with Brittany, I sat in the truck for a long time staring at my dark front porch, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the woman she had just described. The hardest part was not believing it. The hardest part was realizing how easily it fit. Because once doubt enters a room, it starts turning on lights. And suddenly you see things that were always there. What I did not know that night was what had happened less than an hour earlier at a rooftop bar overlooking downtown Dallas. Madison stood near the glass railing with the city lights reflecting off her wine glass. Music drifted through the warm Texas air. Office conversations blended with laughter. The skyline stretched across the horizon like a postcard. By all appearances, she was having the perfect evening. Brittany had been there from the beginning. So had several coworkers and friends. According to Brittany, the conversation started harmlessly enough. Complaints about deadlines. Complaints about managers. Complaints about clients. The usual topics that filled tables after work. Then someone asked Madison a simple question. How is Ryan doing? The question should have taken 3 seconds to answer. Instead, it became the center of the night. Madison laughed before answering. Not a nervous laugh. Not an uncomfortable laugh. The kind of laugh people use when they think everyone already agrees with them. Ryan is still Ryan, she said. Several people smiled politely. Someone asked what that meant. Madison took a sip from her glass and shrugged. It means if you have met him once, you already know exactly what he will be doing 10 years from now. The table laughed. Brittany told me she laughed too at first. Not because the joke was funny. Because nobody wants to be the only person sitting silently at a crowded table. Madison kept going. She talked about how predictable I was. How I preferred weekends at home. How I still drove the same truck. How I never cared about status. How I would rather spend a Saturday fixing a fence than attending a networking event. Each comment drew another laugh. Another smile. Another nod. Looking back, the details were not what mattered. It was the tone. The way she described me. Not like a husband. Not like a partner. More like an inconvenience she had outgrown. At some point, someone asked whether things were okay between us. According to Brittany, that was when the atmosphere shifted. Madison leaned back in her chair and stared out at the city lights. Then she said something that caused the entire table to go quiet for a second. Honestly, I think the marriage has run its course. Nobody laughed that time. Brittany said several people exchanged uncomfortable looks. One woman asked if we were having problems. Madison smiled. Not problems, just reality. She swirled the ice in her glass. People change. Another coworker asked whether I knew she felt that way. Madison shook her head. Ryan still thinks everything is fine. Brittany told me those words bothered her more than anything else. Not because marriages fail. Sometimes they do. Not because people grow apart. That happens too. It was the certainty. The confidence. The way Madison talked about our future as though the decision had already been made, and I simply had not received the memo yet. Then came the moment Brittany could not stop thinking about. My phone rang. Madison looked down at the screen. She saw my name. Everyone at the table noticed it. One coworker smiled and said, "Your husband is checking in." Madison rolled her eyes. She declined the call. A minute later, I called again. She declined that one too. Then another. Then another. By the fourth call, people were watching. By the fifth, someone suggested she answer. Madison laughed and shook her head. Then she typed a message. The same message that eventually appeared on my screen. After sending it, she placed the phone face down on the table and raised her glass. What she did not know was that Brittany had been watching the entire thing. And for the first time in years, Brittany no longer looked at Madison like a friend. She looked at her like a stranger. When I finally walked into the house, the silence felt different. Not lonely. Not heavy. Just honest. The living room looked exactly the way I had left it that morning. The throw blanket was folded over the arm of the couch. A framed vacation photo sat on the bookshelf. Madison's coffee mug was still in the sink from earlier that day. 12 years of marriage surrounded me in small, ordinary details. I stood there for a moment waiting for the familiar urge to call her again. To fix things. To explain myself. To smooth over another rough edge in a relationship that had been collecting rough edges for years. The urge never came. That surprised me more than anything Brittany had said. For so long, I had been the one holding things together. If Madison was upset, I reached out first. If we argued, I apologized first. If conversations became uncomfortable, I was usually the one searching for a compromise. Somewhere along the way, that became my role. The peacemaker. The fixer. The man who quietly absorbed disappointment because keeping the marriage stable seemed more important than being understood. I set my keys on the kitchen counter and noticed something strange. My hands were steady. Looking back, I think that was the moment everything changed. Not when I received the text. Not when Brittany called. The real shift happened when I realized I was no longer afraid of the silence. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table. The digital clock on the microwave read 12:28 a.m. The house hummed softly around me. Air vents. Refrigerator. Distant traffic somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Ordinary sounds. The kind of sounds people stop noticing after years in the same home. My phone remained face down beside me. No calls. No messages. No explanations. I thought about Madison standing on that rooftop. I thought about the confidence Brittany described. The certainty that she already knew how the story would end. Maybe that was what bothered me most. Not that she was unhappy. Not that she had doubts. It was the assumption that my role in the story no longer mattered. As though I was simply a detail to be informed after the decision had already been made. I finished the water and walked upstairs. Our bedroom door stood partially open. Her side of the bed was untouched. A book she had been reading sat on the nightstand with a bookmark halfway through the pages. Seeing it there felt oddly symbolic. A story paused in the middle. I changed into an old t-shirt and sat on the edge of the mattress. Normally, this would have been the part where anxiety took over. Questions. Scenarios. Endless mental conversations that solved nothing. Instead, I found myself staring at the empty pillow beside me and feeling something I had not felt in a very long time. Relief. The realization startled me. Relief was not supposed to appear during moments like this. Yet there it was. Quiet. Uninvited. Real. For years I had been carrying tension I could not name. The tension of constantly monitoring someone else's happiness. Constantly adjusting. Constantly wondering what version of myself would avoid conflict today. Tonight that weight seemed lighter. Not gone. Just lighter. Around 12:45 my phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. Madison. The name sat there glowing in the darkness. One call. Then another. Then a third. I watched each one appear and disappear. For the first time in our entire marriage, I did not answer. A minute later, messages began arriving. Where are you? Why are you not answering? Ryan? The questions kept coming. I read them without replying. The strange thing was that none of them sounded worried. They sounded confused. As though something had happened that violated the rules she expected me to follow. I placed the phone back on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. Darkness settled across the room. Downstairs, the house remained perfectly still. My phone vibrated again somewhere beside me. Then again. Then again. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I fell asleep before the messages stopped. When I woke up, sunlight was already pushing through the blinds. For a few seconds I forgot everything. Then I saw my phone on the nightstand. 32 unread messages. 14 missed calls. Every one of them from Madison. I picked up the phone and scrolled through them slowly. The first messages were irritated. The next few sounded confused. By 3 in the morning, confusion had turned into concern. By sunrise, concern had become desperation. Where are you? Why are you ignoring me? Ryan, this is ridiculous. Ryan, answer your phone. Can we talk? None of the messages contained an apology. That stood out to me. Not a single one mentioned the text she had sent. Not one acknowledged what happened. It was as if the real problem was not her words. The real problem was my reaction. I set the phone down and walked downstairs. The kitchen felt unusually peaceful. Morning light spilled across the countertops. The coffee maker hummed softly. Outside, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. Life continued exactly as it always had. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. For years, mornings had followed a predictable pattern. Madison rushing through emails. Me checking weather forecasts and work schedules. Small conversations about errands and appointments. Today there was only silence. And strangely enough, the silence did not feel empty. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time it was Brittany. I answered. Good morning, she said carefully. Did you get any sleep? More than I expected. There was a pause. Ryan, I need to tell you something else. I looked out the window at the backyard fence. Go ahead. Her voice lowered. After I left the bar last night, a few people stayed behind. One of them called me this morning. I felt my stomach tighten slightly. And Brittany exhaled. Madison kept talking after I left. I closed my eyes briefly. About me? Yes. A few seconds passed. What did she say? The answer came slowly. She told everyone you would never leave. I stared at my coffee. The steam curled upward and disappeared. What exactly did she mean by that? She said you were too loyal. Brittany hesitated. She said you would always come back, no matter what happened. I leaned back in my chair. Those words hurt more than the insults. Not because they were cruel, because they were partially true. For years I had stayed, through dismissive comments, through cold conversations, through months of emotional distance. Every time I convinced myself things would improve. Every time I chose patience over confrontation. Every time I gave the marriage another chance. Somewhere along the way, loyalty had become predictability, and predictability had become weakness in her eyes. There is more, Brittany said quietly. I already knew there would be. Bad news rarely travels alone. What else? The line remained silent for a moment. Ryan, she has been talking to a divorce attorney. The words landed with surprising calmness. No anger, no shock, just clarity, like finally seeing the picture on a puzzle piece that never seemed to fit. How long? I asked. A few months, from what I was told. I nodded slowly, even though she could not see me. Looking back, so many things suddenly made sense. The guarded phone, the unexplained meetings, the growing distance, the strange certainty Brittany described at the rooftop bar. Madison had not been deciding whether to leave. She had already been planning it. The only person who did not know was me. I stood and walked toward the window overlooking the backyard. The grass needed trimming. A loose board on the fence still needed repair. Ordinary responsibilities waited patiently for my attention. Life did not stop simply because a marriage was changing. Ryan, Brittany asked, are you okay? I watched the morning sunlight settle across the yard. I think so. And for the first time since her call the night before, I realized I meant it. Because the truth, painful as it was, had finally replaced uncertainty. And uncertainty had been hurting me far longer than the truth ever could. The rest of that morning moved with a strange sense of purpose. Not urgency, not panic. Purpose. For months, maybe longer, I had been reacting to changes I did not fully understand. Now, for the first time, I understood enough to stop reacting and start paying attention. I finished my coffee, showered, and drove to work. The roads through Plano looked exactly the same as they had the day before. School buses stopped at intersections. Construction crews worked behind orange barriers. People filled drive-through lines on their way to the office. The world had not changed overnight. Only my understanding of it had. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. Madison. I let it ring. A few seconds later, another message appeared. Ryan, we need to talk. I stared at the screen before locking it again. Funny how those words always arrive after someone realizes they no longer control the conversation. Years earlier, I would have answered immediately. I would have rushed to clear up the misunderstanding. I would have convinced myself that communication could solve anything. But this did not feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like information arriving late. That afternoon, I left work an hour early and drove to an office building in downtown Plano. The law firm occupied the third floor. Nothing flashy. No marble columns. No dramatic lobby. Just glass doors, neutral carpeting, and people carrying folders. Real life rarely looks cinematic. Important decisions often happen under fluorescent lights. The receptionist greeted me politely and handed me a clipboard. As I sat in the waiting room, I noticed a framed quote on the wall. It read, "Clarity creates confidence." At the time, it felt strangely appropriate. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Michael Reeves. Mid-50s. Calm voice. Gray suit. The kind of man who listened more than he talked. He asked questions. I answered them. How long have we been married? 12 years. Did we own the home jointly? Yes. Shared accounts? Yes. Children? No. Any previous legal agreements? No. The conversation remained practical, almost boring, and yet every answer seemed to transform uncertainty into structure. That was the unexpected thing about the meeting. Nobody asked me how I felt. Nobody asked whether I still loved Madison. Nobody asked whose fault anything was. The discussion focused on facts, assets, timelines, documents, reality. By the time I left, the afternoon sun was beginning to settle lower in the sky. I sat in my truck for several minutes looking at the folder resting on the passenger seat. The folder itself was ordinary, thin, beige, but somehow it represented something larger. Not revenge, not punishment, preparation. For years I had prepared for everything except the possibility that the person beside me might already be planning an exit. That changed today. When I arrived home, the driveway was empty. Madison still had not returned. I walked inside and noticed the silence again. The same silence that had greeted me the night before. Only now it felt different. Less uncertain. More peaceful. I made dinner. Grilled chicken. Rice. A simple meal. The kind of meal Madison used to call boring. I smiled at the thought. Maybe boring was not the insult she believed it was. Boring meant stability. Boring meant reliability. Boring meant people knew where to find you when life became difficult. As evening settled across the neighborhood, my phone continued vibrating with messages. Some were frustrated. Others sounded emotional. One simply read, "Please answer me." I read every message. I responded to none of them. Not because I wanted to hurt her. Because for the first time, I wanted actions instead of explanations. Words had become too easy. Around 9 that night, another message arrived. This one was different. It contained only a single sentence. "Ryan, I am coming home tomorrow." I stared at the screen for several seconds. Then I looked across the kitchen toward the empty chair where she usually sat. Tomorrow. The word lingered in my mind. What Madison did not know was that tomorrow was no longer arriving on the terms she expected. And for the first time in a very long time, neither was I. The next morning arrived with the kind of stillness that usually comes before a storm. I woke up early, not because I had slept badly, but because my mind felt unusually clear. For the first time in months, I knew exactly what I was going to do. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no speeches, just decisions. I spent the morning moving through the house slowly. A stack of documents sat neatly inside the folder Michael Reeves had prepared. Nothing final, nothing aggressive, just information, options, reality organized into paper form. Around noon, I received another message from Madison. "I am about 30 minutes away. We need to fix this." I read the message twice before setting the phone down. The wording caught my attention. Not once had she asked what I was feeling. Not once had she acknowledged the things Brittany told me. Everything remained focused on fixing the situation rather than understanding how it happened. Outside, the Texas sun hung bright above the neighborhood. Lawnmowers hummed in the distance. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Ordinary life continued as if nothing had changed. Yet inside the house, everything felt different. Around 12:45, a familiar SUV pulled into the driveway. Through the front window, I watched Madison step out carrying an overnight bag. She paused briefly, almost as if rehearsing what she planned to say. Then she walked toward the front door. The lock clicked. A second later, she stepped inside. Her eyes immediately found me standing in the kitchen. For a moment, neither of us spoke. 12 years together, and silence suddenly felt like a foreign language. "Ryan," she said first. Her voice sounded tired. "Thank God." I nodded politely, but said nothing. She set her bag down and looked around the room. That was when she noticed the changes. Small things. Subtle things. The framed photo from our anniversary trip was gone from the shelf. My important documents were no longer stored in the shared cabinet. A few boxes sat neatly stacked in the corner of the dining room. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to communicate that time had continued moving while she was away. Her expression shifted. "What is all this?" she asked. "Preparation," I answered. The word seemed to confuse her. She stepped closer. "Ryan, I know you are upset." Upset. Funny word. It felt far too small for everything that had happened. "I am not upset," I said calmly. "Then why are you acting like this?" Because for the first time, I thought, I am not acting at all. But I did not say it. Madison folded her arms. "You ignored my calls for 2 days. You ignored mine first." The sentence landed harder than I intended. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. Her eyes dropped briefly. I was angry. So was I. Another silence settled between us. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Small sounds filling the space where trust used to live. "Ryan, I did not mean what I said." There it was. The apology I had been waiting for. Yet hearing it brought less relief than I expected. Because the text itself had stopped matching. It was everything surrounding it that stayed with me. The months of disrespect. The certainty. The private conversations. The assumption that I would simply accept whatever came next. "Which part?" I asked quietly. She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "The text," I said. "The jokes? The comments? The plans?" Color drained from her face. Not because I raised my voice. I never did. Because she realized she was no longer controlling the information. For several seconds, she simply stared at me. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "Who told you?" I looked toward the kitchen window where sunlight spilled across the counter. "Does it matter?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The confidence Brittany described at the rooftop bar was gone now. In its place stood someone uncertain. Someone realizing the script she expected was no longer being followed. Her eyes drifted toward the folder resting on the table, then back to me. And for the first time since walking through the front door, she looked genuinely afraid of what might happen next. Madison stared at the folder for a long moment before finally pulling out a chair and sitting down. The confidence that had followed her into the house was gone. In its place sat someone trying to understand how quickly certainty can disappear. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor. Dust drifted through the air. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a lawn mower started up and faded into the distance. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Life rarely announces the biggest turning points while they are happening. "Ryan," she said quietly, "I never thought things would get this far." I nodded. "I know." She looked down at her hands. I was frustrated. "I know." I felt trapped. "I know." Her eyes lifted toward mine. "Then why does it feel like you stopped caring?" I almost smiled. Not because the question was funny. Because it was the exact opposite of the truth. "I cared for a very long time," I said. "Longer than you realize." The room fell silent again. Looking back, that was the moment I finally understood something important. People often mistake patience for weakness. They mistake loyalty for dependence. They mistake kindness for a lack of options. But patience has limits. Loyalty has boundaries. And kindness should never require someone to abandon their self-respect. Madison wiped at the corner of one eye and shook her head. "I never wanted to hurt you." I believed her. That was the strange part. I truly did. Most damage in life is not caused by people trying to be cruel. It comes from people becoming careless with things they assume will always be there. A marriage, a friendship, a family member, a good person. Day after day, they take one more step too far because nothing happens. Until one day something finally does. "The problem is not what you intended," I said calmly. "The problem is what you accepted." She looked confused. So I continued. "At some point, disrespect became normal. The jokes became normal. The distance became normal. And eventually, the idea of losing me stopped feeling real to you." Tears filled her eyes. This time she did not argue. Because deep down, I think she knew it was true. The conversation lasted another hour. There were apologies, explanations, regrets. But there was no dramatic ending. No miracle moment where 12 years of problems suddenly disappeared. Real life does not work that way. Some bridges collapse slowly. And even when both people regret it, rebuilding them requires more than words. A few months later, the divorce was finalized. It was not ugly. It was not loud. It was simply finished. I sold the house and moved into a smaller place outside Plano. I spent more time with friends, more time outdoors, more time becoming someone I had neglected while trying to save a relationship that no longer wanted saving. As for Madison, I heard she eventually changed jobs and moved to another city. I genuinely hope she found peace. I mean that, because carrying resentment is just another way of staying stuck in the past. The greatest surprise was not how much my life changed afterward. It was how calm everything felt. No more guessing. No more chasing approval. No more trying to convince someone to value what they had already decided to overlook. Just peace. Simple, quiet peace. Sometimes people ask me if I regret staying as long as I did. The answer is no, because I can walk away knowing I gave my best. And there is a certain freedom in that. Looking back now, I do not remember the text message as the moment my marriage ended. I remember it as the moment I finally started listening to myself. And maybe that was the beginning, not the end. If you watch this story all the way through, I would genuinely love to know your thoughts. Do you think Ryan stayed too long? Or do you think loyalty is worth fighting for until the very end? Share your perspective in the comments because every experience teaches something different. And if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing and joining us for more real-life inspired journeys about relationships, resilience, and finding strength when life takes an unexpected turn. Sometimes the hardest lessons become the ones that change us for the better.